Through Don Quixote, Cervantes invites us to think about how we justify action in an absurd world, a world in which victory is elusive and virtue is not reliably rewarded. He invites us to rethink our theories of choice. Modern portrayals of choice in management and business are overwhelmingly in a calculative and consequentialist tradition. In that tradition, choice is seen as driven by expectations, incentives, and desires. The litany of choice is first, what are my alternatives? Second, what are the consequences that I expect to follow from those alternatives? Third, how do I evaluate those consequences from the point of view of my desires? And fourth, choose that alternative that promises consequences most congruent with my desires. This conception of human behavior is by no means new. What is distinctly modern, however, is the extent to which a consequentialist justification of action has become taken for granted. In particular, the entire apparatus of modern business management is built on such a conception. In the Western world, and most conspicuously in Western business schools, consequentialist justifications and explanations of actions have been sanctified. They are accepted as morally and pragmatically obvious. They are taught as sacred dogma. Such teachings honor ideas that are of enormous importance in the history of human development. It is inconceivable that we could imagine a world in which they were unimportant. Nevertheless, the ideas have their limitations. Many of those limitations are well known from studies of decision-making. Alternatives are not given, but have to be discovered or created. Expectations are not known routinely, but have to be developed. And that in development introduces uncertainties and errors. Desires are neither clear, nor unified, nor stable, nor exogenous to the processes of choice. These behavioral implications are important, but the deeper limitation of consequentialism is its dependence on unrealistic hopes. Management requires great commitment. Great commitments require great hopes. To motivate their commitments, managers tell themselves and are told by others, anything is possible. But that is not true in general. Experience encourages skepticism about human and organizational capabilities. Although individuals and organizations sometimes achieve what they hope to achieve, they often do not. The failure of grand hopes encourages delusions and provokes cynicism. A consequential logic demands heroic expectations that, when revealed as unattainable, result in self-delusion, cutting corners, cheating, lying, and the sacrifice of decency. Disappointment, despair, and retreat are common correlates of consequential choice. In fact, however, the linkage of action to the expectation of positive consequences is an incomplete portrait of humanity. John Stuart Mill, himself a distinguished utilitarian, characterized Bentham, the patron saint of modern consequentialist thought, as having, quote, the completeness of a limited man, end quote. In particular, Mill wrote that, quote, man is never recognized by Bentham as a being capable of desiring for its own sake the conformity of his own character to his standard of excellence without hope of good or evil from any other source than his own inward consciousness. What Mill recognized, and we to some extent have forgotten, is that Bentham and his modern consequentialist disciples exclude from their vision of humanity a second grand tradition. That second tradition sees commitment as based on attempts to fulfill the obligations of personal and social identities and senses of self, particularly as those obligations and senses are informed by the ethos and practices of great human institutions. It is a tradition that speaks of self-conceptions, of identities and proper behavior, rather than expectations, incentives, hopes, and desires. The second vision for the justification for action and commitment has become somewhat obscured in contemporary life and particularly in business schools, but a logic of consequences can be contrasted with a logic of appropriateness, by which actions are matched to situations by means of rules organized into identities. When individuals and organizations fulfill identities, they follow rules or procedures that they see as appropriate to the situation in which they find themselves. Neither preferences, as they are normally conceived, nor expectations of future consequences enter directly into the calculus.